was interesting because that's one of the examples that I talked about growing up as a kid, is that you really got to, in Aspen, you didn't need to turn on the TV to see where the economy was, because you'd either hear Yahoo from Texas, or you'd hear, whatever from New York, or, it was like you could hear the accent, and that told you where the economy was, who was doing well that year.
Oh, that's a fascinating point. Yeah. Yeah. And I think in a way, don't you think it because it was so cosmopolitan, that it afforded us this a glimpse into the world writ large, even though it was so protected and so bubblish. I think in a lot of ways we grew up more sophisticated.
Well, we got a backstage view into stuff. And, when you're serving as a waiter and you're serving the dinner tables of people who are the top executives at NBC, and they're talking about their new shows. I mean, you didn't know what to think about it. You heard all that stuff. So it was like you kind of got a little bit of a flavor of what was going on. And it would come in waves, because it was very here's the Christmas guys, here's the Easter guys. It was, it kind of would, it was like Surfer, and you'd kind of go underneath the waves. But you kind of got affected by a lot of that. And I felt like as a kid, being in Aspen, coming from, like, my wife came from a small mountain town here in Oregon, and the big city, whoa boy, it's like this big thing. Whereas with Aspen, a lot of kids were sort of ready to go out and check the world and see it and stuff. And I think a lot of it is because we saw some of it and it inspired us.
Yep, for sure.
So before we close out on the MTV thing, I do have one more question for you, and then we'll move on to more fun topics. But what's your take on the state of music television today?
Is there a music television today, Chris?
Well, that's a good question, and I've been telling my kids who are they don't want to believe me, but I'm old enough to remember when there was music on MTV, and they don't believe me. So.
Yeah, I think it's YouTube, isn't it? I mean, I know they're still making videos. I know that artists today still make music videos, but I don't know that anyone distributes them for entertainment sequentially and nonstop, and radio on TV. I just don't think that's anywhere. And so, I mean, MTV.
Maybe they're doing the visuals as an afterthought now. In other words, if you're going to have your music on YouTube, for example, you got to have something to look at, or these kids' attention span is too short.
It's interesting because you're talking about market, and one of the things that I remember, Carolyne, I thought, because I could have sworn Sally and I drove up there, but I remember MTV was trying to get you to do a show in Aspen, and you said, I don't want to be the one to bring that to Aspen, I'll do Vail.
We did it in Vail.
Yeah, and I think I remember going there with Sally to meet you and just say hi and whatever, because we were right there. And I felt like, you know what? It doesn't seem like much, but I think you gave Aspen another 10 years by doing that. Really. Because the 80s kind of, we got our own little mix of it, but by the 90s, all of a sudden the world, the Extreme Games and MTV was here in full bore,
What was the show or the event?
I think it was I did a show for them which you may be new, called the Top 20 Countdown.
Yeah.
But they did, it was just what it sounds like. But there was a syndicated version that wasn't on MTV that would air in different markets that didn't. There were some markets, believe it or not, in 87 or 88 that didn't have MTV on their cable system, but they would syndicate this show. So we did two different versions of it, and it was for the syndicated version of the Top 20 Countdown. And we went skiing. We did one on the slopes.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was in Vail. That's funny. Wow.
My little beater car, I think we drove up there.
Philosophically, I'm going back to your question about music television. In some ways, you remember, you may not remember this as much as I do because MTV was more a part of your childhood than it was mine. But when I was growing up, when I talk about driving up the pass, listening to Who's Next, and all I knew of any band was what they showed us on their cover. And sometimes the liner would have photographs. But other than that, you had no idea what anybody looked like, and you didn't really care. It was just whether the music was good. And, you vibed with the music. So MTV obviously just changed that entire formula.
Yeah.
Everything changed from then on. And so the band didn't even have to be that good if they looked good. And you'd have a huge smash on your hands. And in some ways, it could be seen as a precursor, I think, to this society we live in today. You extrapolate that all the way to Instagram and TikTok and,
that's really, if there was a seminal video that really encapsulates that, I think it would be the Dire Straits, Money for Nothing. I mean, you have the old guys just sitting there cussing out and ripping on all the young guys, with this spiked hair and fur coats. And yeah.
But Carolyne, here's another thing that was very interesting, because when MTV was young, it was very young. And when a lot of the musicians started to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a format. Oh my God, this is a way for me to reach my audience. Wow, this is cool. I mean, this was before Taylor Swift. And you had all these bands doing stuff. That was when Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson did We Are the World. That was when, Ain't Gonna Play Sun City with all the bands. And what happened was that rallied a lot of people, our generation. So we decided to cut out on coke. When all that stuff started to happen, then all of a sudden the South African government had pressure put on it from a little music station because of the artists that pumped up the people. U2 did it too. And it was interesting because, Nelson Mandela was in jail for how long? But it wasn't until MTV started to hit the airwaves across the world where people could join in on the same thing at the same time with their artists, pushing them into that. And all of a sudden, now with the corporations realizing how strong that is, they have to pull off themselves. I mean, they have to pull a Taylor Swift. They have to say, okay, I'm going to go record all my own stuff again, And it's interesting because U2 was up in front and they were doing all that stuff, with Bloody Sunday and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, disappeared. You're still involved. They're still doing stuff, but they can't use that format anymore.
Right.
And it's interesting because MTV, as much as we talk about MTV, it also had other effects that were very interesting in society.
I think they were, to be honest, I think that they more followed than led. I think they sort of, I remember Rock the Vote was a thing.
Just going to say,
Yeah.
But that wasn't, MTV didn't, I think the artists are the ones that led that.
I think they did.
MTV said, oh, this is a thing. Okay, we're on board then.
Or, it's Madonna. It's U2. Okay, let's give them, they deserve because, if a little nobody band said something, they probably wouldn't do anything. But because it was Madonna and Michael Jackson and U2, they did stuff. And I feel like it's interesting because now those corporate strings that are holding it and closed it down, it's kind of interesting because doors are opening up now in a much different way. Podcasts, we're doing podcasts. Everything's clickable now, and it doesn't need to be universal. It doesn't need to be Viacom. It can be anything. It's a link. It's a click. What I mean? And so now, how do you present it to folks so that all of a sudden people click into it? And you see people like Taylor Swift just taking charge, and it's interesting because we are at an interesting time.
So Taylor Swift aside, let me ask you, Carolyne, do you feel that level of celebrity that rock stars used to hold is still alive and well today. And by that, I mean, my kids, even yesterday, my kid was talking to me. He said, it's great that Iggy Pop is so normal these days. And I'm like, Iggy Pop was unhinged. He was absolutely crazy when he was, and I tried to explain it to him. I was like, no, you got to remember, these were the days when, Led Zeppelin would throw TVs out of the hotel rooms, and right. People would light stuff on fire. Ozzy would snort fire ants, and things like that. Yeah, he bit the head off the bat, I don't see that today. I mean, I do know that, let me quantify that. The Taylor Swift going to the Super Bowl, for instance, for example, would be a good example of that same level of rock stardom that we used to see when you would go to a concert with 20,000 other kids. Yeah, does that exist? That level of rock stardom exist today?
Don't you think? With Taylor Swift, Beyonce
and Taylor Swift, I would say, are definitely in that ballpark.
But I think that's so manufactured and commercialized. I'm thinking of, you mentioned The Who, Keith Moon died, think of all the shenanigans all those guys did, all the things they did to get in trouble, and all the money they spent on things. And they were in the headlines, but they were rock stars. They could do whatever they wanted. The only stuff I hear like that today, other than the commercialized stuff with Taylor Swift, for example, would be these guys going to prison for having terrible sexual acts with younger people and, or whatever else. I just don't see that in crazy rock star stuff.
I think they're more controlled and managed.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why, if maybe you're getting at a level of notoriety that doesn't exist today, and if it does, I think there's two things. I don't know. I think there's a couple things happening. One, the kind of antics that you're talking about, Iggy Pop, Zeppelin, Ozzy. I feel like people today, if they did shit like that, they'd get canceled.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right.
I think they're controlled. They're so careful to manage their reputation, their careers. Nobody wants to misstep. Nobody wants to make a misstep.
Maybe they broke the system or something.
Yeah, I think that. Maybe.
Yet some of it was the reason they got to where they were was because of the missteps. That
right.
Their character of who they were in a sense.
Jim Morrison or something. Yeah, exactly.
So
it was entertainment.
So it's almost like movies too. Once it becomes so formulaic, everybody gets used to the formula and they don't want the formula. They want something new.
Right.
Waiting for that to happen in politics. It seems that the system is broken now. Maybe we can just, self-regulate. That'd be nice.
Everything's broken.